Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would talk to you guys a little bit about one of my favorite accessory movements, particularly for me because I'm in a tricep specialization phase because my triceps are probably my weakest and most lagging body part in terms of my general strength. So I'm giving them a lot of attention, and that also means picking really effective exercises that allow you to do a lot of volume without developing overuse injuries and tendinitis. And I think that's the main thing that we need to look at here. And that's one of the things that disappoints me given all of the data and all of the strength and conditioning material that's out there today. The fact that a lot of box gyms still don't have things like bands and chains. They'll put a machine in, they'll put a cable station in, but they don't have these simpler devices that are actually more effective for a lot of what they're trying to do. I go so far as to say that if you have a full set of bands and chains, which have enormous benefits for a lot of things we do with barbells, but they can literally replace, and in many cases are superior to anything you can do with a cable. Right? They're superior because we're able to create the strength curves and stuff that we actually want. So you look at something like a chain like this, and you get some people who will say, well, can you do this with a cable? Well, no, it's not the same thing. Cable is continual tension. Cable's continual tension. The chain deloads at the bottom. So why is this so special to do this? What are the perks of it? All right, well, number one, it's a more natural strength curve. All right up front, if you look at the strength curve, we're usually weaker when the tricep and the elbow's fully bent. Right? We're going to be weaker as we're going up, and we tend to be stronger at the top due to the mechanical leverage. Right? Because of the mechanical advantage of the levers involved with the forearm, we're actually stronger near the lockout on most tricep exercises. Right? We're stronger near the lockout. In other words, it requires more weight at those points to actually maximally recruit muscle fibers because we tend to be weaker at the bottom. And we're not weaker because we're recruiting less muscle fibers. And if anything, we have a very large amount of muscle fiber engagement at the bottom. Right, particularly one like that, when you get stretched back a little bit, the long head gets more work. Long head gets more work than it would on a lot of movements because we're pulling all the way down with a little bit of shoulder extension. But as we go further up, we get a leverage advantage due to the forearm angles changing. And that's going to be true of any sort of extension that you do. It can be true of any extension that you do. And so by the weight being gradually heavier, and in this case it really kicks in about midway through for me because of the chain links I'm using. But what it lets us do is get a stretch reflex at the bottom with a lighter weight in that stretch position where we can start developing speed out of the bottom because it's a lighter weight and we're just worried about getting a stretch reflex, which is what that does. And since we get a stretch reflex, we can start the weight moving really quick and accelerate it. And with a lighter weight, that's going to be a little bit better. But then as the exercise would normally be getting easier as we go up, because we've already developed force, and then we get that moment arm advantage of the forearms, we're now adding weight to it quickly. So all of a sudden, the lateral and medial head are doing more work than they would normally do. So we're hitting the long head at the bottom and getting it to get a stretch reflex, which is actually really good. The long head tends to respond very well to stretch reflex type movements. Anything that stretches it, because it's a kind of a stretch position muscle to begin with. That's its function. So when you put it into a movement that gives it a little bit of a stretch reflex, it tends to fire really effectively. Whereas in the lateral and medial head are real workhorses, and we're treating them as such when we go to chains like this. They are being used as workhorses to move that heavier weight through the top half. Because again, it is getting heavier there. So it tends to work all three heads of the triceps very effectively. Because a lot of times we would think of these almost in a rollout fashion as being a lot more dominant to the lateral and medial head, but because we're coming down back the way where I am, back behind the head a little bit, we are getting that stretch reflex on the long head, which makes it all three heads of the tricep. Now there is going to be a little more focus on the lateral and medial head because of the nature of it, but if you're trying to build pressing strength, particularly chest pressing strength, those heads matter the most. But that long head will kind of give you that bigger tricep from the side, like when people see it. So for people who are chasing kind of the aesthetics thing, that long head becomes more important. But the point is, this exercise is very effective for both, right? It's going to do both of those things. Makes it a pretty much a complete tricep movement. Now, what's also interesting, and this is why this is such an effective exercise for what we're doing and why things like chains bring so much to the table that people don't always think about. Really why they need to have access to stuff like this. What else do we have to look at? We have to look at tendinitis and overuse. People who perform a lot of small tricep exercises are the people whose elbows always hurt, right? And they'll blame it on heavy lockouts on bench, but that's not what's causing it. That's not what's causing it. It's their smaller tricep movements. Well, when you look at what's going on with the tendon there, because we are unloading the weight at the very bottom, it's usually the bottom that's the biggest culprit. It's usually when your elbow is fully bent, right? The elbow's fully bent. It's not out straight. That the positions that we tend to put that in tends to cause those tendons around the elbow to rub against the bone. And that can cause inflammation, and in the worst case, it could build up calcification, which can be very difficult to sort. But a lot of people's smaller tricep movements do that. Because you need to. In fact, if you don't get that full bend, or your muscle fibers in the triceps, you don't work. You can't just do lockout partials for them. They're not going to fully develop. But in this case, we're using a lighter weight at that point and using a stretch reflex a little bit to get the weight moving. And then the weight builds up. So by deloading it slightly at the bottom, we cause less of that stress on the tendon, right? Because there's a little less weight on it there than we might normally have. We are slightly deloading that. And that's not, enormous difference, but it could matter over the course of a large number of sets. It can matter when you're doing large volumes of training. And we'll get to that in a minute. But by that same token, what else do we see? You're having to put your hands in a neutral position. Putting our hands in a neutral position. Well, that's one of the fixes for tricep tendinitis also. A lot of times we'll do skull crushers with dumbbells. Because if people with an easy bar or a straight bar a lot of times frequently start getting that tendinitis, they get elbows that hurt. Those tendons where the tricep inserts at the elbow start to get inflamed. Well, inflamed tendons are how we get overuse injuries. Right? That's how we get overuse injuries. When we go to this neutral grip position, it also puts less stress on those tendons. So dumbbells are usually one of the fixes for tendinitis. Well, the chains, by their very nature, force us to go into that same position as dumbbells. They force us into that same position. So what does that mean? It means we have two different factors happening with this exercise that reduce tendinitis. They reduce connective tissue inflammation. And some people say, well, is that a big deal? Well, it's an enormous deal. Because that's the problem with single joint and smaller exercises. They tend to cause more tendon damage. They cause more inflammation because of the weird angles they put you at. Because it's not natural to use a single joint exercise. Your body's not built to do that. A lot of people who do bodybuilding stuff don't understand that. That's not the normal, natural movement pattern for your body to try to isolate something. And because we're not built to do that, it's easy to get overuse injuries in some of those positions if you don't pick them carefully. Well, in this case, we're picking it very, very carefully, and we're doing so in a way that deloads and unloads the normal problem areas we get with the tendons. And that's a big deal when we start doing really large volumes. Like in this case, I might do 10 sets of these every week. So 5 sets twice a week on both my upper body days. Well, that's a lot. I mean, 10 sets of a small exercise in a week is a pretty large amount of volume. But we need that. If you're trying to maximize muscle growth in an area, we know that higher volumes of training become necessary to maximize muscle growth, particularly in a lagging muscle. If you have a muscle that's lagging, you're going to have to do more work for it. That is generally the only way that muscle is going to come up. And it doesn't matter what's causing it. It doesn't matter if it's just lower training loads because of the exercises you use, or it's the fact that you don't have a great neuromuscular efficiency in that muscle and it needs to be developed, or maybe you don't get a lot of blood flow to it, which again, maybe it doesn't have enough capillary beds and everything. Well, you can only fix all those things with training volume. That's usually your best fix for most of those problems. Well, if you're picking exercises that cause tendinitis, you're going to be very, very limited on the training volume. But when you find exercises like this that cause less of it, and that very effectively hit all three heads, you're going to get a lot. You're going to get a lot of training volume potential for that entire muscle that isn't going to totally beat you up. right? It's not going to beat you up. And if we can get away without getting beat up, without our tendons and joints and stuff getting beat up on the exercises we're doing to specialize in weak points, we can get a lot more effective training volume in because we can recover from it easier and do more of it. Well, that's the secret to muscle growth. That's the secret to bringing up lagging muscles. And this is just one more valuable tool. This is a very effective, very valuable tool that we have in the toolbox once you learn how to use it. And the same concepts of what you're seeing here can be applied to other things. We're just discussing general concepts. We can look at a lot of different exercises and muscle groups and everything else and apply these exact same concepts. In this case, it's just a tricep specific one. But again, it's a way of looking at selecting your accessory movements. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.